Why, check fire! Check fire! You're shooting at ghosts, echo actual. The radio static screamed louder than the wind. Dust, thick and choking like pulverized bone, slammed against the lens of the scope. I don't have eyes on, Nano. We are taking heavy fire from the North Ridge. They're flanking us. The voice of Lieutenant Commander Thorne was jagged, stripped of its usual arrogance. If you can't see them, disengage and RTB. That's an order. Don't waste the ammo. On the cliff edge, 3,000 meters away, CWO3 Elara Vance didn't blink. Her body was buried under a thermal blanket and 3 inches of sand. Her heart rate was a steady 42 beats per minute. Negative echo actual, Elara whispered, her voice barely registering over the gale. I don't need to see them to kill them. Vance, you are blind. The wind is gusting 60 knots. It's physically Crack. The recoil of the .50 caliber punched into her shoulder, a brutal, familiar kiss. 3 seconds of agonizing flight time. Silence. Then, the radio crackled. Not a command this time. A gasp. Target down! How the hell did you do that? 8 targets remaining, Elara said, cycling the bolt. Don't move. 14 hours earlier, Forward Operating Base Anvil. The air in the briefing room at Forward Operating Base Anvil smelled of stale tobacco, CLP gun oil, and aggressive masculinity. It was a scent Chief Warrant Officer 3. Elara Vance knew better than her own perfume. She stood in the doorway, a figure so slight she barely cast a shadow under the flickering fluorescent lights. At 4'9", she didn't just look out of place. She looked like a clerical error. Her flight suit was tailored, but it still bunched at the ankles. On her back, a pelican case nearly as tall as she was rested against the doorframe. Inside, 6 men from SEAL Team Echo were sprawled across folding chairs, laughing. They were titans, bearded, tattooed, sculpted from protein powder and violence. So I told Command, if you send me a babysitter, make sure he can at least carry a ruck, one of them boomed. It was Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne, Echo Actual. He leaned back, boots on the table. And what do we get? Intel says we're getting a specialized asset for Overwatch. Probably some drone geek, another SEAL muttered, sharpening a knife. Elara stepped into the room. Her boots made a distinct rhythmic thud on the plywood floor. The laughter died, strangled by confusion. Thorne lowered his boots slowly. He squinted, looking past her, then realized there was no one else. His gaze dropped and dropped again, until it met hers. You've got to be kidding me. Thorne exhaled, a laugh bubbling up again, cold and sharp. Are you lost, sweetheart? The JAG office is in the portable next door. Elara didn't flinch. She walked to the front of the room, dragging the massive pelican case behind her. The wheels rumbled like distant thunder. She parked it, next to the tactical map, snapped a salute that was crisp enough to cut glass, and stood at parade rest. Chief Warrant Officer Vance reporting for attachment, sir, she said. Her voice was low, devoid of tremors. It wasn't a shout, but it carried to the back of the room. Thorne stood up, towering over her by nearly 2 feet. He walked around her, inspecting her like one would inspect a defective parachute. Vance. Nano. I saw the file. I thought it was a typo. He gestured to the team. Gentlemen, meet our Overwatch. I hope you packed your lunch boxes because it looks like we're taking a field trip to kindergarten. The room erupted in chuckles. Hey, Nano, a heavy gunner named Miller called out. You need a booster seat for the helo ride? Elara ignored Miller. She kept her eyes locked on Thorne. I'm qualified on the platform, Commander. I'm here to provide long-range interdiction and reconnaissance for Operation Blindfold. Thorne's smile vanished. He leaned down, invading her personal space. Listen to me, Chief. This isn't a shooting range in Virginia. We're going up into the Kush. Altitude is 8,000 feet. The terrain is vertical. My guys carry 80 pounds of gear. You weigh, what? 90. 95, sir. 95, Thorne repeated, disgusted. Your rifle weighs 30. Your ammo weighs 20. You are a liability. If you lag behind, I will leave you. If you compromise my team, I will cut you loose. Do we understand each other? Elara looked up. Her neck hurt from the angle, but she didn't break eye contact. In his eyes, she saw the same thing she had seen in every commanding officer's eyes for the last 10 years. Fear that she was weak, and anger that he had to deal with it. I understand, sir, Elara said, but you should check your intel on the exfil route. Thorne paused. Excuse me? Elara gestured to the map on the wall. You're planning a low-level extraction through the Salang Pass at 1400 hours tomorrow. Meteorological data from the local agri-stations indicates a thermal inversion building in the valley. High pressure meeting cold air. We checked the weather. It's clear, Thorne snapped. It's clear now, Elara corrected him, her voice turning clinical. But by 1400, the wind shear in that pass will be exceeding 50 knots, with updrafts capable of grounding a Blackhawk. If you take that route, you won't be flying out. You'll be walking into a kill box. Silence stretched across the room again. Thorne looked at the map, then at his comms officer. The officer shrugged, looking uneasy. And, Elara continued, if we're walking, I suggest you worry less about my pack weight and more about the fact that your current loadout for the saw gunner is too heavy for a rapid ascent on the alternate route. Thorne stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment. The mockery was gone, replaced by a simmering irritation. He hated being corrected, especially by someone he could pick up with one hand. Sit down, Vance, Thorne grunted, turning his back to her. Don't speak unless spoken to. Elara didn't sit. She moved to the back of the room, finding a corner in the shadows. She sat on her pelican case, resting her hands on her knees. Inside that case was the Macmillan TAC-50, a beast of a weapon that had broken shoulders and spirits. They called her a doll. They called her a joke. She watched them joke and posture, their confidence filling the room like smoke. They didn't know yet. They didn't know that in 48 hours, amidst the screaming wind and blinding sand, they would be praying to the doll to save them. Elara closed her eyes and began to count her heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Briefing starts in 5, Thorne barked. Let's get this over with. The insertion bird, an MH-47 Chinook, didn't touch down. It hovered 10 feet off the jagged spine of the ridge, its rotor wash whipping the loose scree into a frenzy of stinging projectiles. The ramp dropped, and the world dissolved into green phosphor and noise. Go, go, go! The crew chief screamed, his voice barely audible over the turbines. Elara threw herself off the ramp, hitting the ground with a bone-jarring thud. The weight of her ruck, 65 pounds of misery including the disassembled Macmillan TAC-50, drove her knees into the gravel. She didn't stay down. Momentum was the only thing keeping her upright. She scrambled forward, clearing the rotor arc, and dropped into the prone position beside a cluster of rocks. The Chinook peeled away, plunging into the valley darkness. Silence rushed back in, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the synchronized heavy breathing of 7 men adjusting their gear. Sound off? Thorne's voice crackled over the comms, low and distorted. 1 up. 2 up. Elara waited for her slot. 7 up. All right, Thorne commanded. We have 6 clicks to the overwatch point. Elevation gain is 2,000 feet. We have 4 hours of darkness. Move out." They moved. The seals moved with a predatory grace, their strides long and eating up the ground. Elara didn't have that luxury. For every one step they took, she had to take 2. Her legs burned immediately. The rucksack wasn't just heavy. It was a parasitic entity trying to drag her backward off the mountain. The straps dug into her trapezius muscles, cutting off circulation to her arms. Within 20 minutes, the formation stretched. Thorn was pushing the pace, a punishment masquerading as operational necessity. He wanted her to fail. He wanted to call in a failure to adapt before the sun came up, so he could leave her at an extraction point and proceed with real soldiers. "Hey, short stack!" Miller's voice came over the inter-team radio, dripping with mock concern. He was the rear guard, walking directly behind her. "You're breathing hard. You want me to take that heavy gun off your hands? It's almost as big as you." Elara gritted her teeth, tasting the copper tang of exertion. -5. Maintain your sector." "Just saying," Miller chuckled. "No shame in tapping out. This is big boy terrain." Elara switched her radio to receive only. She focused on the ground, illuminated by her AN/PVS-31 night vision goggles. The world was a wash of monochromatic white phosphor. Rock, rock, loose shale, rock. She turned the pain into a math problem. Step count, rhythm. Inhale for 2 steps, exhale for 2. The terrain shifted. The gradual slope turned into a brutal 45-degree ascent. The air thinned as they crossed the 9,000-foot mark. This was the equalizer. The massive muscle mass of the SEALs, an advantage in close-quarters combat, became a liability in the thin air. Oxygen demand for a 220-pound operator carrying 80 pounds of kit was astronomical. Elara, at 95 pounds, required a fraction of that fuel. Her heart rate stabilized at 165 beats per minute. High, but sustainable. She stopped fighting the mountain and started climbing it. Her small boots found toeholds the men missed. Her low center of gravity kept her stable on the sliding scree where the larger men slipped and cursed. 30 minutes into the steep ascent, the formation began to compress. The rhythmic crunch of boots ahead of her slowed. She saw the point man, Viper, stumble. He recovered, but his chest was heaving. The line was accordioning. Thorn halted the column. "Hold up!" Thorn wheezed slightly over the comms. "Water break! 2 minutes!" Elara didn't stop. She didn't need the water yet, and if she stopped, the lactic acid would seize her legs like concrete. She kept moving, a slow, steady trudge, passing Miller. "Hey!" Miller whispered, breathless. Hold up, Vance." She ignored him. She passed the comms officer. She passed the medic. She moved up the line, a ghost in the green dark, until she reached Thorn at the front. He was leaning against a boulder, taking a pull from his hydration tube. He looked down, his NVGs glowing like demonic eyes, startled to see her standing there. She wasn't gasping. She was breathing deeply, controlled, through her nose. "Ready to move when you are, sir," she whispered. Thorn stared at her. Even through the night vision, she could feel his confusion. He expected her to be collapsed at the back, crying for help. Instead, she was waiting for him. "Check your spacing, 7, Thorn snapped, though the bite was gone from his voice, replaced by a sullen annoyance. "Don't get ahead of the point." "I'm just maintaining momentum, sir. Kinetic energy is hard to build back up once lost." Thorn capped his water. "Let's go," he growled to the team. The dynamic shifted in the dark. The jokes ceased. The only sound was the struggle of men against gravity. Elara maintained her position near the front, her legs burning with a fire that felt like purification. She remembered the training days at Quantico, the instructors who laughed, the ruck marches where she vomited bile but refused to quit. This was no different. Pain was just information. By the time they reached the ridgeline, the sky to the east was bleeding a faint, bruising purple. The GPS indicated they had reached the separation point. "Echo team, hold here," Thorne ordered. "Vance, your nest is 300 meters up that spur. Can you make it?" It was a vertical scramble up loose granite, a death trap for anyone clumsy. Elara looked up at the peak. "I'll be set in 20 mics." She turned to leave but felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Miller. "Vance," he said. He didn't offer to carry her bag this time. He held out an extra magazine for her pistol. "Don't spend it all in one place." It wasn't an apology, but in the language of men who killed for a living, it was an acknowledgement. She wasn't a liability yet. She was just a nuisance who could hike. "Keep your head down, Miller," she said, taking the mag. She turned and began the final climb alone, leaving the team behind to descend into the valley. As she hauled herself up the jagged rock, the wind hit her, the first warning of the violence to come. It screamed over the ridge, tugging at her pack, trying to throw her off the edge. She dug her fingers into the stone. She was small, yes, but she was built for the crevices where the big men couldn't fit. She was the needle, and they were the hammer. And the needle was about to thread the eye of the storm. The separation from the team was not just physical, it was an ontological shift. One moment, Elara was part of an organism, a trailing limb of a tactical unit, and the next, she was a singular point of consciousness in a vast, indifferent wilderness. She watched the heat signatures of Echo Team fade into the ravine below, green ghosts swallowing themselves into the earth. Then she turned her back on them and faced the rock. The designated coordinates for the observation post were a tactical joke. Intelligence had picked a saddle between two peaks based on satellite topography, but on the ground, it was a bowl of loose scree with a 50% obstruction from a jutting granite shoulder. From there, she would see half the village, half the time. That was unacceptable. Elara scanned the ridge, her eyes, trained to dissect landscapes into grids of cover and concealment, landed on a spur of rock jutting out over the sheer drop-off like a broken tooth. It was terrifyingly exposed to the wind and offered zero retreat. If she took fire there, she had nowhere to go but down, a 2,000-foot drop to the valley floor. It was perfect. She moved with agonizing slowness. At this altitude, sound carried like a bell chime. A dislodged rock clattering down the face could alert a sentry miles away. She placed her boots deliberately, testing the weight before committing, her center of gravity low. The pelican case was gone, stashed in a crevice lower down. Now the weapon was strapped to her back, the barrel extending well past her head, snagging on the wind. Reaching the ledge required a traverse across a face of slick, icy granite. Elara dug her gloved fingers into a fissure, her boots smearing on the rock. The wind gusted, pressing her flat against the wall. For a second, the abyss pulled at her, a silent, magnetic promise of release. She closed her eyes, reset her grip, and pulled. She rolled onto the ledge. It was barely 6 feet wide and covered in sharp, jagged shale. She didn't rest. The sun would crest the peaks in less than an hour, and she needed to be invisible by then. Elara began the ritual of construction. She unclipped the Macmillan TAC-50 from her pack. In the hands of a larger man, the rifle was a tool. In her hands, it looked like artillery. She assembled the bolt, feeling the cold steel slide home with a mechanical perfection that calmed her racing heart. She attached the suppressor, a long cylinder that would dampen the roar but not the shockwave. Next came the veil. She pulled the ghillie netting from her pouch, shaking out the jute and burlap. It wasn't just a blanket. It was a carefully constructed chaos of colors and textures meant to mimic the dead earth of the Hindu Kush. She draped it over herself and the weapon, breaking up the hard, unnatural lines of the rifle barrel and the human form. She lay prone behind the rifle, shifting her hips to dig a groove into the shale. She had to mold the ground to her body. She would be lying here for 12, maybe 24 hours. Comfort was irrelevant, but stability was life. She brought the Leupold spotting scope to her eye and dialed the focus. The valley leapt into clarity. 3,000 meters away, the target village was a cluster of mud brick compounds, sleeping in the indigo dawn. She could see the goats penned in a courtyard. She could see the embers of a dying fire. She reached for the Kestrel 5700 Elite. The small weather meter was her lifeline. She held it up, letting the impeller spin. Wind, 12 mpg, gusting 18. Direction, 270 degrees. Temperature, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure, 22.10 in Hg. She frowned. The pressure was dropping, faster than the forecast predicted. The wind wasn't just moving air, it was turbulent, erratic, and it eddied around the peaks, creating invisible rivers of force that could push a bullet 10 feet off target at this range. Elara pulled her logbook from her sleeve pocket. She didn't trust digital memory alone. With a grease pencil, she began to build her range card. She sketched the valley, marking reference points. A burnt-out Soviet tank hull, a lone cypress tree, the minaret of the mosque. She lazed the distances with her rangefinder and wrote them down. Tank, 2,450 meters. Tree, 2,800 meters. Compound main gate, 310 meters, 3,010 meters. 2 miles. At that distance, the bullet would take nearly 5 seconds to arrive. During that flight, the world would turn. The Coriolis effect meant the Earth would literally rotate out from under the bullet as it flew. She had to aim not where the target was, but where the target would be in 5 seconds, while compensating for the planet's spin, the bullet's spin drift, air density, and the capricious wind. It was math so complex, it bordered on art. She keyed her radio, the microphone pressed against her throat. "Echo Actual, this is Overwatch," she whispered. Her voice was flat, stripped of the fatigue that ravaged her body. A pause, then Thorne's voice, tight and breathless. "Go for Actual. I am set at Alpha 1. I have positive ID on the objective. Green on comms. Green on ammo." "Copy, Overwatch," Thorne replied. There was a hesitation, a brief break in his professional cadence. "How's the view up there, Nano?" It was a test, a jab. "Clear," Elara said. "I can see you, Actual. You're bunching up near the Wadi entrance. Dispersion needs to be 20 meters. There was silence on the line. Then, she watched through the scope as the green figures on the valley floor immediately spread out. "Copy that. Spacing out," Thorne said, his voice clipped. Elara lowered her head to the stock of the rifle. The cheek weld was hard and cold. She slowed her breathing. The isolation settled over her like a heavy blanket. Up here there was no rank, no gender, no size. There was only the wind, the math, and the waiting. She was the eye of God, waiting to blink. "Radio silence," she whispered to herself. She lay still, letting the frost form on the back of her gloves. The sun began to bleed over the horizon, turning the gray rock to gold. The day had begun, and with it, the variables began to change. The cold that had bitten through Elara's bones at dawn vanished, replaced by a radiant, oppressive heat. The sun was now a hammer striking the granite peaks, and the air in the valley below began to boil. For a sniper, heat was an enemy more insidious than the cold. Cold numbed the fingers, but heat deceived the eye. Through the scope, the village of Darvaz was no longer a sharp collection of geometric shapes. It was a swimming oil painting. The mirage, the refraction of light passing through layers of air at different temperatures, caused the target area to ripple and dance. Straight lines bent, walls breathed. At 3,000 meters, a man standing still looked like a flickering candle flame. Elara adjusted the parallax knob on her scope, but it didn't help. She dialed the magnification down from 25x to 15x. Counterintuitively, seeing less detail gave her a clearer picture. The lower magnification minimized the distortion of the mirage, allowing her brain to piece together the wobbling shapes. She had been motionless for 4 hours. Her muscles had locked into a cramping rigidity she simply ignored. She urinated without moving, letting the specialized absorption pads in her suit do their work. To move was to die. To move was to fail. "Actual, this is Overwatch," she whispered, the mic picking up the dry click of her tongue. "Atmospherics are degrading. Mirage is heavy. Visibility is 6 out of 10. "Copy, Overwatch." Thorne's voice came back impatient. "We are held at the release point. 2 clicks out. Give me something, Vance." "Stand by." Elara wiped sweat from her eyelid with a slow, deliberate blink. She focused on the main compound, a 2-story structure with high walls. Intelligence stated the target, a warlord known as the Engineer, would emerge for midday prayers. Activity. The heavy iron gates of the compound creaked open. A Toyota Land Cruiser, armored with crude steel plates, rumbled into the courtyard. Elara held her breath, stopping the natural rise and fall of her chest to stabilize the crosshairs. Figures spilled out of the vehicle, not the expected family members. These were men with slung rifles, AK-74s, not the older AK-47s usually seen in the hands of farmers. Uniformity in their gear, chest rigs, radios. "Actual, I have movement in the courtyard," Elara reported, her voice tightening. "Technical vehicle, multiple dismounts, armed. Looks like a PSD, personal security detail. Is the package with them?" "Wait." A man stepped out of the rear of the Land Cruiser. He wore a pristine white shalwar kameez and a black vest. He was tall, bearded, and walked with a limp. Elara checked the photo taped to the inside of her scope cap. The limp matched. The height matched. "PID established," she said. "The engineer is on site. I repeat, package is on deck." "Good," Thorne said, the eagerness palpable. "We are moving up. ETA 20 mics. Negative actual. Hold," Elara cut in. She shifted her aim, scanning the perimeter wall. The heat shimmer parted for a fleeting second, revealing the rooftops. "I am counting 4, 6, 8 gunmen on the roof. 2 DSHK heavy machine gun positions on the north and south corners, and the dismounts in the courtyard." "That's not a local militia, Thorne. They're moving in stack formation. That's foreign fighters, maybe Chechen." She did the math quickly. The intel report briefed 12 hostiles total. She was counting 25 visible, with likely more inside. Actual, the target density is triple the estimate. They have heavy weapons and professional movement. This is a hardened target. Recommend abort or fire support. The radio was silent for a long 5 seconds. The wind hissed over the ridge, sounding like tearing paper. "We don't have fire support on call, Vance. The drones are grounded for maintenance, Thorne replied, his voice hard. We are here. We have the element of surprise. If we pull back now, he moves, and we lose him for another 6 months. Thorne, if you breach that gate, you're walking into a meat grinder. Those DSHKs will tear the team apart before you clear the fatal funnel. That's why you're up there, isn't it? Thorne's voice dropped an octave. You wanted to be the hero, Nano. Do your job. Suppress the heavies when we initiate. Can you make the shot or not? Elara stared at the heavy machine gun 3,000 meters away. It was a black speck in a soup of shimmering air. The wind was picking up again, gusting unpredictably. To hit that target, she would have to thread a bullet through a chaotic atmosphere, aiming 10 feet above and 12 feet to the left of where the gun actually sat, praying the math held. I can take the north gun, she said softly. But once I fire, they'll know where I am. You'll have seconds to breach. That's all we need. Echo team, listen up. We are green light. Green light. Execute timeline alpha. Elara felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. He wasn't listening to the risk. He was listening to the glory. Copy actual, green light, she replied. She reached up and adjusted her elevation turret. Click, 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 60 minutes of angle. The turret topped out. She would have to hold over the rest in the reticle. She watched the SEALs, invisible to the naked eye, begin their final approach through the wadi. They were crawling toward a hornet's nest, convinced their armor was impenetrable. Elara exhaled, pushing the air from her lungs until she was empty. She centered the crosshair on the chest of the gunner manning the DSHK. The heat waves made him dance, but she waited for the rhythm. The waiting was over. The variables were set, and the first mistake had just been made. Not by her, but by the man in charge. Echo actual to Overwatch. On my mark. 3, 2, 1. Send it. Elara squeezed the trigger. It wasn't a pull. It was a press. A steady increase of pressure straight back until the sear broke. The Macmillan TAC-50 roared, a concussive slap that kicked up a cloud of dust despite the dampening of the suppressor. The stock slammed into her shoulder, a recoil so violent it blurred her vision for a fraction of a second. 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4. At 3,010 meters, the bullet was a traveler. It was climbing, peaking in its arc hundreds of feet above the valley floor, battling the crosswind, the air density, the rotation of the earth. Through the scope, the image settled just in time. The DSHT gunner on the north roof was lighting a cigarette. He didn't hear the shot. The bullet was traveling faster than the speed of sound. He would be dead before the crack of the rifle reached him. 5. The gunner's chest vaporized. He didn't fall backward. He simply collapsed straight down, as if his strings had been cut. A pink mist, visible even at this distance, hung briefly in the stagnant air. Splash, Elara whispered. Target down. North roof clear. Below, the valley exploded into action. Breacher up! Breaching! Breaching! Thorne's voice screamed over the comms, no longer the composed commander but a conduit of violence. On the south side of the compound wall, a puff of gray smoke blossomed, the breaching charge. A second later, the dull thump reached Elara's ears. The SEALs flowed through the gap like black water, moving with a terrifying speed. Inside the scope, it was a silent movie of carnage. Elara saw the muzzle flashes from the windows, bright, angry sparks. She saw the SEALs returning fire, their suppressed MK-18s flickering like strobe lights. But in her earpiece, it was a cacophony. Contact front, hallway, left. Man down, no, he's up, keep moving. Flash out, Elara panned the scope, ignoring the main fight. Her job wasn't to watch the show. It was to watch the exits. "Squirter, East Gate," she called out, spotting a figure sprinting from the rear of the compound. He carried an AK-74 and was moving toward the tree line. "Overwatch, we are engaged. Handle it," Miller yelled, the sound of automatic fire drowning him out. Elara worked the bolt. The brass casing, hot enough to burn skin, ejected into the dirt. She loaded a fresh round. She didn't adjust her dials. She used the reticle hash marks. "Lead the target. 2 mils left." She fired. 4 seconds later, the runner pitched forward, sliding face first into the dust. "Target neutralized," she said flatly. Back in the compound, the fight had stalled. The foreign fighters weren't breaking. They were holding the fatal funnel of the main hallway. "They're dug in!" a voice shouted. "Viper, frag out!" Suddenly, the center of the compound erupted. It wasn't a frag grenade. The entire second floor of the main building heaved upward. Windows blew out in jagged shards. The roof collapsed inward, swallowing the DSHK emplacement she hadn't shot. A massive plume of black smoke mushroomed into the sky, instantly obscuring the target area. "IED! IED! Sound off!" Thorne screamed. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. The explosion was huge. Secondary charges. The intel had missed the fact that the building was rigged. "Echo, report." "Dusty here, ringing, but good." "Miller, good." "Viper, I'm good. That was close. The stairwell is gone." Elara scanned the smoke, switching her scope to thermal mode. The white-hot bloom of the explosion blinded the sensor for a moment, before cooling enough to reveal shapes. "Actual. I have heat signatures moving in the rubble," Elara reported, her voice cutting through their panic. "North corner, ground floor. They are flanking you." "Copy! Miller, watch your 6." She watched as Miller spun around, his weapon flashing on the thermal display. The heat signatures of 2 enemies crumpled to the floor. "Clear! Room clear!" Miller shouted. "Moving to target room!" There was a pause, filled only by the heavy breathing of men and the crackle of burning debris. Elara swept the perimeter. The village was waking up. Lights were flickering on in adjacent houses. The element of surprise was dead and buried. "Jackpot!" Thorne's voice came over the net, breathless but triumphant. "I repeat, jackpot. We have the package. He's alive. Cuffing him now." Elara exhaled, her shoulders slumping slightly. They had him. "Actual, we have multiple military-age males mobilizing in the village," Elara warned. "You stirred the hive. Suggest immediate RTB." "Copy, Overwatch. We are collapsing out. Get us cover." "Roger. I am tracking." The SEALs emerged from the smoke, dragging a hooded figure between them. They moved slower now, burdened by the prisoner and the adrenaline dump. They looked small and fragile against the vast backdrop of the hostile valley. Elara looked up from the scope for a fraction of a second. To the west, the sky was changing. The brilliant blue was fading into a sickly, bruised yellow. The wind, which had been gusting, suddenly died completely. The silence was heavier than the gunfire. "Actual," Elara said, checking her kestrel. The barometric pressure was in freefall. "You need to double time to the LZ. The weather is turning." "We see it, Vance," Thorne replied, his voice tight. "We're moving. Don't tell me how to run. Just shoot anything that chases us." Elara didn't respond. She looked back through the scope. The dust from the explosion wasn't settling. It was hanging suspended in the air. The valley was holding its breath, and on the horizon, a wall of brown was beginning to eat the mountains. The mission was a success. The war was just starting. The silence that followed the gunfire was unnatural. It wasn't the peace of a ceasefire. It was the vacuum before an implosion. Elara lay motionless on her granite shelf, the barrel of the Macmillan TAC-50, tracking the retreating form of Echo Team. They were moving south through the wadi, a chaotic snake of green bodies dragging the captured warlord. They were moving fast, fueled by the adrenaline of the breach, but to Elara's eye, they looked agonizingly slow. The terrain was fighting them, loose shale, knee-deep scrub, and the uneven weight of the prisoner who was dead weight in their arms. "Actual, maintain spacing," Elara murmured, scanning the ridges above them. "You have potential squirters on the east ridge, 800 meters out. They are observing, not engaging." "Copy, Overwatch. We are pushing to LZ Sparrow, ETA 10 mics." Thorne's voice was jagged, breathless. "Get Kingpin on the net. Tell him we are bringing the package hot." Elara shifted her gaze from the scope to the valley floor, then to the horizon. Something was wrong. The light had changed. The harsh, bleached white sunlight of the Afghan high noon had taken on a sickly, sepia tint. Shadows were losing their edges, blurring into the ground. She glanced at the Kestrel meter mounted next to her scope. The numbers were flickering. Barometric pressure, 2810 in Hg, 2795 in Hgs. It was plummeting. "Kingpin 2-6, this is Overwatch." Elara keyed the long-range net, bypassing the team channel. "Requesting status on inbound aviation." "Overwatch, Kingpin 2-6." The pilot's voice crackled, sounding thin and distant. "We are 2 minutes out, but we are painting heavy weather to the north. Radar is lighting up like a Christmas tree. What are your on-ground conditions?" Elara wetted a finger and held it up. The wind, which had been whipping her hair across her face for hours, had stopped completely. The air was dead, heavy. It tasted metallic, like copper and ozone. The hairs on her arms stood up against the fabric of her flight suit. Static electricity was building. She looked north, past the village, past the valley entrance. The mountains were gone. A wall of earth, miles high and stretching across the entire width of the horizon, was consuming the world. It wasn't a cloud. It was a solid, churning avalanche of brown suspended in the air. It looked solid enough to crush bone. A haboob. "Actual, Kingpin! Weather alert!" Elara shouted, abandoning the whisper. "Massive atmospheric event inbound from the north. It's a haboob. Wall of dust. Visibility 0 in 30 seconds. "Say again, Overwatch?" Thorne's voice was incredulous. "It's sunny down here. We are 1 click from the bird." "Look behind you, Thorne." Elara watched through the scope as Thorne stopped and turned. Even at 3,000 meters, she saw his body language shift from aggression to absolute stillness. The wall of brown was towering over the valley, eclipsing the sun. The light vanished instantly, plunging the world into a twilight gloom. "Kingpin 2-6, abort! Abort inbound!" Elara screamed into the mic. "You cannot fly in this. The intake filters will glass in seconds. Visibility is dropping to 0. Wave off." "We see it, Overwatch. Holy sh... Breaking off. Echo actual, Kingpin is waving off. We cannot land in that. We are RTB. Good luck, boys." The thumping sound of the approaching rotors faded, replaced by a new sound. It started as a low vibration in the rock under Elara's chest, then grew into a roar. It sounded like a freight train derailing, 1,000,000 tons of sand grinding against stone. "No, bring that bird back," Thorne yelled. "We have the HVT. We are in the open." "Actual, get to cover," Elara commanded, her voice cutting through his panic. "You have to find hard cover now. The wadi is going to become a wind tunnel." Where? There's nothing here. The ravine to your west. 400 meters. It's a choke point, but it has overhangs. Move! Run! The SEALs scrambled. The order and discipline of the withdrawal disintegrated into a desperate sprint. They dragged the prisoner, stumbling over rocks. The wall hit the village first. Elara watched as the buildings simply disappeared. The dust swallowed them whole. It was moving at 60 miles per hour. Then it hit her. It didn't start with a gust. It started with a hammer blow. The wind slammed into her perch with such force, it lifted the 60-pound rifle case off the ground and hurled it over the cliff edge. Elara grabbed the TAC-50, burying her face into the dirt, wrapping her limbs around the heavy weapon to anchor herself. The light died. Day turned to absolute night. The sand wasn't just dust. It was grit, sharp and abrasive. It scoured any exposed skin raw instantly. It filled her nose, her ears, her mouth. The noise was deafening, a constant screaming roar that drowned out her own thoughts. "Actual! Status!" she screamed into the radio, but she couldn't hear herself. The static in the earpiece was a white noise scream. She pulled her thermal blanket over her head and the scope, creating a tiny, suffocating pocket of air. She checked the comms display. Signal strength was non-existent. The density of the particulate matter in the air was blocking the RF waves. She was blind. They were blind. And the enemy, the ones she had seen on the ridge, the ones mobilizing in the village, they were indigenous to this hell. They knew how to hunt in the dark. Elara lay huddled on the ledge, the wind trying to peel her off the mountain. She checked her watch. 14:15 Zulu. The extraction was gone. The air support was gone. The sun was gone. She was alone with 7 men who hated her, separated by 3,000 meters of screaming darkness, and an army of killers who knew exactly where they were. The shift had happened. The hunter was now the prey. The world did not fade away. It was erased. One moment, Elara had a visual on the valley floor, a topographical map of ridges and wadis. The next, she was staring into the face of a brownish-red void. The haboob didn't just obscure vision, it swallowed light. At 14:20 Zulu, the sun was blotted out so completely that Elara had to flip her night vision down just to see her own hands. But the NVGs were useless. The billions of sand particles whipping through the air reflected the infrared light back into the tubes, creating a blinding wall of static known as blooming. She tore them off, cursing. The wind on the ledge was now a physical assault, a constant 60-mile-per-hour hand trying to shove her into the abyss. Elara flattened herself against the granite, her flight suit snapping violently. She pulled the thermal blanket tight over her head and the scope of the TAC-50, creating a crude hood. "Echo actual, status," she screamed, static, a wall of white noise that sounded like bacon frying. The sand was electrically charged, scrambling the UHF frequencies. She switched to the internal team channel, cranking the squelch down to 0. "Can't see, shh. Where is the wall? Miller, sound off." Thorne's voice broke through, distorted and tinny, stripped of its command presence. "I'm blind," Miller's voice. "I can't see my hand in front of my face. The strobe is washing out." Elara pressed her eye to the scope. She switched the thermal polarity to black hot. The sensor struggled. The air itself was hot now, the friction of the sand creating a thermal wall. But down in the valley, the heat was different. She saw them, 7 faint, ghostly smudges huddled against a rock outcropping. They weren't moving. They were cowering. "Actual, I have you," Elara said, speaking slowly and clearly, hoping the transmission would cut through the interference. "You are exposed. You are stopped in the open." "Vance? Is that you?" Thorn sounded like a drowning man finding a lifeline. "We can't navigate. The GPS is spinning. Which way is the ravine?" "West. Turn 90 degrees left. Move 50 meters. There is a cut in the rock." "Moving! Echo on me, left face, move!" Through the thermal scope, the blobs began to move, stumbling, erratic. They were terrified. The sandstorm had stripped them of their greatest advantages: air superiority, satellite intel, and coordinated movement. They were just men in a blender. Suddenly, a new heat signature flared on the edge of the scope's field of view. It was brighter, hotter, an engine block, then another, and another. 3 distinct, burning rectangles were tearing through the storm to the north, moving parallel to the wadi. They weren't stumbling. They were driving with purpose. "Actual, freeze!" Elara yelled. "Contact! Mechanized! 3 vehicles moving south-southeast! They are cutting you off!" "We don't hear them. The wind is too loud." "They are on top of you, Thorn. 200 meters north. They are using the noise to mask their approach." The enemy knew the terrain. They didn't need GPS. They knew the wadi funneled into the ravine, and they were driving blindly toward the choke point to seal it. "Get to the rocks! Now! Go!" Elara watched the thermal ghosts of the seals break into a desperate sprint, but the trucks were faster. The lead vehicle, a Toyota Hilux with a mounted heavy machine gun, slewed sideways, drifting in the sand, and came to a halt directly across the entrance to the ravine. The heat bloom of the muzzle flash was blinding on the thermal screen. Thump, 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 thump. The DSHK opened up. Even over the gale force wind, Elara heard the rhythmic pounding of the heavy caliber rounds. It was the sound of death. "Contact front! Contact front!" The radio dissolved into screams and the chatter of automatic fire. The seals dove for cover behind a shallow berm. They were trapped. The enemy truck was blocking their only exit, and the heavy rounds were chewing up the earth around them. Elara tried to find a firing solution. She ranged the truck. 2,800 meters. But the wind. It wasn't just blowing left to right. It was swirling, updrafting, creating a vortex in the bowl of the valley. A bullet fired now would be like throwing a feather into a tornado. The probability of a hit was statistically 0. "Vance, do you see it?" Thorn screamed. "We are pinned! We can't move! Suppress that gun!" "I can't take the shot, actual," Elara whispered, her hands shaking as she gripped the turret. "The wind is 60 knots. I have no data for this. I can't predict the drift." "I don't care about the math!" Thorn roared, the desperation cracking his voice. "Shoot the gun or we die right here! That's an order!" Elara looked through the scope. The DSHK was pouring fire into the SEAL's position. She saw a heat signature, Miller maybe, flinch and roll back. "Man down! Miller is hit!" The stakes had just shifted. It wasn't about math anymore. It was about chance. Elara dialed the windage knob. She cranked it all the way to the right, then held the reticle further into the black void of the storm. She was aiming at nothing. She was aiming at where she felt the wind wanted the bullet to go. "Firing blind!" she hissed. She exhaled, feeling the grit crunch between her teeth, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle slammed back. She racked the bolt immediately, keeping her eye on the scope. 5 seconds. The DSHK kept firing. "Miss," she whispered. The bullet had vanished into the chaos, swallowed by the storm. "Impact negative! They're still firing!" Thorn yelled. "Do it again!" "I don't know where it went!" Elara shouted back, panic rising in her throat. "I have no splash! I can't correct. The storm had stolen her feedback loop. Without seeing where the bullet landed, she couldn't adjust. She was throwing rocks in the dark, and her friends were bleeding out. The second and third trucks pulled up, flanking the first. More heat signatures spilled out. Infantry. They were spreading out, forming a semicircle around the pinned seals. It was a kill box, a textbook execution setup, and the only person who could stop it was a 4'9" woman perched on a cliff, blinded by the very element she was supposed to master. Echo is combat ineffective. Thorne's voice was a whisper now. We are fixing bayonets. It's been an honor. No, Elara said. She closed her eyes for a second, shutting out the thermal chaos. She felt the wind on her cheek. She listened to the roar. She stopped trying to fight the storm and tried to become it. No, she said again, opening her eyes. Don't move, I'm dialing it in. The sound of a DSHK 12.7-meter heavy machine gun is not a rattle. It is a rhythmic, mechanical coughing. Thump, thump, thump. Each round carries enough kinetic energy to punch through a cinder block wall, a vehicle engine, or a human torso protected by ceramic plates. 3,000 meters below, that sound was the metronome counting down the final seconds of SEAL Team Echo. Elara lay paralyzed on the granite shelf. The wind was a physical weight, pressing her into the rock, piling drifts of sand against her flank. Through the thermal scope, the scene in the valley was a nightmare rendered in grayscale. The 3 enemy trucks formed a perfect L-shaped ambush. The lead truck, the one with the DSHK, was pouring fire into the shallow depression where the SEALs were trapped. The heat signature of the gun barrel was glowing white-hot, a beacon in the storm. But the SEALs were fading. Their thermal outlines were stationary, huddled together. Miller is unresponsive. The medic's voice cut through the static, high-pitched and bordering on hysteria. I can't stop the bleeding. The sand is getting in the wound. Vance! Thorne's voice was a raw, shredded scream. Where is that fire? We are dying down here. Shoot the goddamn gun! Elara gripped the bolt handle of the Macmillan, her knuckles white. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to seize her throat. She had missed. The first shot had vanished into the maelstrom. In sniper school, the rule was simple. Fire. Observe splash. Correct. Fire for effect. But there was no splash. The sandstorm swallowed the dust cloud of the bullet impact. She was firing into a black hole. She had no data. I can't see the impact, actual! She yelled back, tears of frustration mingling with the grit in her eyes. I don't know where to hold. The wind is variable. It's gusting anywhere from 40 to 60 knots. I don't give a damn about the wind, Thorne roared. Just walk it in. Spray and pray if you have to. I have 20 rounds, Thorne. If I spray, you have no cover. We have no cover now. A rocket-propelled grenade, RPG, streaked from the enemy line, a bright flare on the thermal screen. It impacted the berm right in front of the SEALs. The explosion washed out the sensor for a second. When the image returned, the SEALs were scrambling, trying to dig deeper into the hard earth with their hands. They were rats in a barrel, and the enemy infantry was moving. Elara saw the smaller heat signatures detaching from the trucks, moving in bounding overwatch. They were closing the distance, flanking. They would be in grenade range in less than 2 minutes. Elara pulled her eye away from the scope. She looked at the Kestrel meter. The numbers were useless, jumping wildly. The science had failed. The ballistics calculator, a marvel of modern engineering, could not account for a chaotic system of this magnitude. She closed her eyes. Focus. You are not a calculator. You are a shooter. She remembered her father, A deer hunter in the Appalachians. Don't look at the leaves, he used to say. Feel the air on your neck. She stripped off her right glove. The cold wind bit into her skin instantly, sanding her fingertips. She placed her bare hand on the rock ledge. She felt the tremors. The wind wasn't a constant stream. It was a pulse. It slammed against the mountain, surged, and then, for a heartbeat, lulled before the next surge. Surge. Scream. Lull. Surge. There was a rhythm to the chaos, a pattern in the turbulence. She put her hand back on the grip, her skin touching the freezing composite stock. She settled her cheek onto the weld. Actual, Elara said. Her voice was suddenly terrifyingly calm. The panic had burned itself out, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. I am engaging. Keep your heads down. She looked through the scope. The white-hot barrel of the DSHK was her anchor. She didn't look at the windage dial. She didn't look at the elevation chart. She looked at the storm. She watched the way the dust flowed past the objective. It was moving right to left, violent and fast. At 3,000 meters, with a 50 mph full-value crosswind, the bullet would drift nearly 30 feet. 30 feet. That was the length of a bus. She had to aim at empty space. She had to aim at a patch of swirling darkness so far to the right of the truck that it felt like madness. She had to trust that the wind would carry the bullet into the path of the enemy. She moved the crosshairs. She drifted past the truck, past the flanking infantry, past the rock outcropping. She settled the reticle on a nothingness in the storm. Wind check, she whispered to herself. She waited. She felt the wind battering her legs. Surge. The scope shook. Scream. The visibility dropped. Then the pressure eased. The roar dipped slightly. The lull. Now. She didn't snatch the trigger. She pressed it straight back, letting the surprise of the break catch her. Boom! The rifle bucked, driving the bipod legs into the shale. Shot out, she whispered. She cycled the bolt instantly. Clack, clack. A fresh round slid into the chamber. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. She didn't blink. She watched the thermal image of the truck. 5 seconds. Nothing happened. The DSHK kept firing. Thump, thump, thump. She had missed again. No, she hissed. Too much hold. She adjusted. She didn't touch the turrets. She shifted her body, moving the point of aim 3 miles to the left. She was painting the picture in her mind, visualizing the arc of the bullet surfing the wind. One more, she breathed. She waited for the rhythm. Surge, scream, lull. She fired. The recoil punished her shoulder. She was 95 pounds of flesh fighting against 12,000 foot-pounds of energy. Her collarbone ached. Her head throbbed. 1, 2, 3, 4. She watched the heat signature of the gunner, the man standing behind the white-hot barrel. 5. The heat signature vanished. It didn't fall. It disintegrated. The upper torso of the gunner simply ceased to exist on the thermal display. The heavy machine gun fell silent instantly. Target down! Elara screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. Direct hit! Gunner is down! For a second, there was only static. Then a voice choked with disbelief. Confirmed, Thorne rasped. Jesus Christ. Confirmed. The gun has stopped. Have the range, Elara said, her hands trembling as she chambered the next round. I have the wind. Don't move, Echo. I'm clearing the board. The math was gone. She wasn't calculating anymore. She was feeling the storm, and for the first time, she was the deadliest thing in it. The death of the gunner bought the SEALs perhaps 10 seconds of life. Through the thermal scope, Elara watched the body cool rapidly against the white-hot metal of the truck bed. But the machine was not dead. She saw movement on the passenger side, another heat signature scrambling up the wheel well, reaching for the spade grips of the DSHK. "They're remanning the gun!" Thorne screamed over the radio. "Vance, put it down!" Elara didn't answer. She was already cycling the bolt. The brass casing flew out, spinning in the dark, and landed on the growing pile of spent shells next to her leg. She pushed the bolt forward, stripping a new round from the magazine. This wasn't standard ball ammunition. The tip was painted green and white. It was a MK211 Mod 0 Raufoss round, high-explosive incendiary armor-piercing, designed by Norwegians to kill machinery. Inside the bullet sat a tungsten carbide penetrator and a charge of RDX explosive. It didn't just punch a hole, it burrowed inside and detonated. "Adjusting," she whispered. The wind howled, a banshee scream that tore at her ghillie suit. The lull she had found before was gone. The storm was angry now, swirling with a chaotic violence that defied physics. Elara gritted her teeth. Her shoulder throbbed with a deep, dull ache that radiated down her arm. The TAC-50 was a sledgehammer, and she was the anvil. Every shot was a micro-concussion to her skeletal structure. She looked at the truck. The new gunner was swinging the DSHK around. "Don't shoot the man," she told herself. "The man is renewable. The machine is the threat." She shifted her aim lower, below the gun shield, below the driver's compartment. She aimed for the glowing rectangular block in the chassis, the engine, specifically, the fuel rail running along the block. Distance, 3,010 meters. Time of flight, 4.8 seconds. Drop, 4,200 inches. Windage, immeasurable. She had to feel it again. She closed her eyes for a microsecond, letting the tremors of the rock travel up her chest. The mountain was vibrating with the wind. Push, push, release. She opened her eyes. The crosshair was floating in the black void of the storm, aiming 20 feet to the right of the truck. It looked wrong. It looked insane. To hit the target, she had to aim at a completely different grid square. Send it. She pressed the trigger. Crack. The recoil slammed her backward, sliding her body an inch on the loose shale. Dust puffed up around the muzzle, instantly snatched away by the gale. 1,000. The new gunner opened fire. Tracers from the DSHK lashed out blindly into the ravine, chewing up the rocks where Echo Team lay prone. 1,000. Elara held her breath. The bullet was fighting the air, spinning at 200,000 RPM, burning its way through the wall of sand. 1,000. "Come on," she hissed. 1,000. On the thermal screen, a spark appeared. It wasn't the dull splash of lead on dirt. It was a brilliant, blinding flash of white light. The Raufoss round struck the engine block of the Toyota. The tungsten penetrator shattered the cast iron block, and the incendiary charge ignited the fuel vapor instantly. 5. The truck didn't just stop, it erupted. A massive bloom of heat washed out the thermal sensor. Even from 2 miles away, the explosion was a distinct event. The fuel tank caught a second later, turning the vehicle into a fireball. The DSHK stopped firing. The gunner was thrown from the bed of the truck, a burning ragdoll tossing through the air. "Impact!" Elara shouted, her voice cracking. "Target destroyed! Vehicle is burning!" Down in the ravine, there was a stunned silence. The seals, huddled in the dirt, watched the fire raging in the storm. It was a lighthouse in the brown dark, a beacon of impossible violence delivered from the heavens. "Actual!" Miller's voice came over the net, breathless. Did you see that? She blew the whole damn truck. Thorne didn't respond immediately. When he did, the tone was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a bewildered awe. "Good hit, Overwatch," Thorne said, his voice quiet. "That was hell of a hit." "I have 2 more vehicles," Elara said, cutting him off. She didn't want praise. She wanted ammo count. "They are breaking formation. Infantry is dismounting. They know where I am now." She was right. The element of surprise was gone. The tracers from the remaining 2 trucks weren't aiming at the SEALs anymore. They were tilting up. Red streaks began to zipper through the sky, probing the ridgeline. They couldn't see her, but they knew the angle. They were firing at the mountain, hoping to catch the ghost. Elara stayed prone. A round cracked overhead, snapping like a whip, the sonic boom of a projectile passing close. "They're searching for me," she said, working the bolt again, clack, clack. "I need to suppress the infantry before they flank you. Echo, can you move?" "Negative," Thorne replied. "We have wounded. We are combat ineffective until you clear those other 2 trucks." "Roger." Elara wiped a smear of grit and sweat from her eye. The first shot was luck. The second was intuition. Now she had to do it 7 more times, while the mountain around her disintegrated under heavy machine gun fire. She looked at her hand. It was trembling. She forced it still against the stock. "Okay, Nano," she whispered to herself, using the name they mocked her with. "Be the doll. Be the smallest thing in the world." She centered the crosshairs on the second truck. The impossible was just a warm-up. The mountain began to disintegrate around her. The enemy had stopped aiming at the SEALs and turned their rage upward. The 2 remaining technical trucks were raking the ridgeline with heavy machine gun fire. 12.7 rounds slammed into the granite face 50 feet below Elara's position, shattering the rock and sending geysers of stone shards flying into the storm. They didn't know exactly where she was, but they knew the angle. They were playing a game of probability, saturating the cliff face in hopes that one lucky round would find flesh. Elara didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to. She lay flat, pressing her body into the depression of the ledge, letting the ghillie suit absorb the debris raining down on her back. "Actual sitrep," she whispered. Her voice was steady, a stark contrast to the chaos screaming in her earpiece. "We are pinned!" Thorne yelled. "We can't lift our heads! We are going Winchester on primaries! I have 2 mags left per man! If they flank us, we are done!" Winchester. The code for out of ammunition. The SEALs were about to be reduced to pistols and knives against a mechanized force. Elara swept the thermal scope right. The burning wreck of the first truck created a massive heat bloom that washed out the center of the image. But on the periphery, she saw them. 4 heat signatures. Infantry. They had dismounted from the rear truck and were moving low, crab-walking through the scrub brush to the east. They were using the noise of the DSHKs to mask their movement, flanking the SEALs' position. "Actual, you have 4 dismounts moving to your right flank," Elara reported. "They will be on top of you in 60 seconds. "We can't see them. The dust is too thick." "I see them." Elara adjusted her position. The movement sent a jolt of agony through her right shoulder. She could feel the tissue swelling. The recoil of the TAC-50 was a cumulative punishment. After 3 shots, it hurt. After 5, it bruised. She had fired 6. Her pectoral muscle felt like it had been struck with a bat. The skin under her flight suit was already turning a deep, angry purple. She ignored it. Pain was just a signal. She disconnected the signal. She focused on the Liad infantryman. He was moving fast, hunched over an AK-74. He was 2,900 meters away. The problem was the sound. If she fired now, the muzzle blast would cut through the wind. The enemy gunners on the trucks would see the flash or hear the crack, and they would correct their aim. They would walk those heavy rounds right up to her ledge. She had to become a ghost. She listened to the wind. It was a living thing, a rhythmic beast. It would build, scream like a jet engine, and then taper off. Wait for the scream, she told herself. She tracked the lead runner. He was closing the distance, 50 meters to the SEAL's blind spot. The wind began to rise. A low moan deepened into a roar. The sand lashed against her scope lens. Not yet. The roar intensified. It shook the ground. Now. Elara squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked violently. The sound of the shot was instantly swallowed by the gale. To the men in the valley, it was just another crack of thunder in the storm. Down below, the lead runner simply crumpled. He didn't scream. He dropped face first into the sand, his heat signature slowly beginning to fade as the ground absorbed him. "One down," Elara whispered. The other three didn't stop. They didn't know their point man was dead. The visibility was so poor, they thought he had just gone prone. Elara worked the bolt. Her arm was trembling now. The physical effort of cycling the heavy action while lying prone was exhausting. She forced the round home. She shifted to the second man. Wait for the wind. It didn't come. The lull stretched out. The runner was getting closer. 30 meters. "Vance, they're close! I can hear them shouting!" Thorne's voice was panic-stricken. "Stand by." She couldn't wait for the wind. She had to trade concealment for speed. She fired. The shot cracked through the lull, sharp and distinct. The second runner spun around, hit in the shoulder. The kinetic energy of the .50 caliber round tore his arm off. He fell, writhing, but the silence was broken. Immediately, the tracers from the trucks shifted. They walked up the cliff face, closer this time. A round struck the ledge 10 feet to her left. Stone fragments sprayed her face, cutting her cheek. Warm blood trickled down her neck. "They have me," she said calmly. "Nano, status." "Suppressing," she replied. She didn't retreat. She cycled the bolt again, 2 targets left. They had stopped moving. They were confused, looking up at the mountain, trying to spot the muzzle flash through the brown haze. That was their mistake. They stopped. Elara didn't wait for the wind. She didn't wait for the pain to subside. She fired. The third man dropped. She cycled again. Fast, brutal. She fired. The fourth man dropped. "Flank is clear," she said, her voice sounding hollow in her own ears. 4 tangos down. Right side is clear. The heavy machine gun fire was now hammering her position. It wasn't random anymore. They were bracketing her. Rounds were cracking overhead, the sonic booms overlapping. She was pinned. "Actual, I am taking heavy fire," she said. "I have to displace. You have a window. Move, now." "Copy, moving, echo, on me, go, go." Elara grabbed the barrel of the rifle. It was scorching hot. She dragged the weapon backward, crawling on her stomach, scraping her body over the sharp shale. She slid into a deep fissure just as a 12.7-meter round obliterated the rock where her head had been 3 seconds ago. She huddled in the crevice, panting. Her shoulder was on fire. Her face was bleeding. She checked the magazine. 2 rounds left. She reached into her vest and pulled out her spare magazine. Her hands were shaking so hard, she dropped it. It clattered against the rock. "Focus, Elara," she hissed. She picked up the magazine and jammed it into the magwell. 10 rounds, plus 1 in the chamber. 11 shots. That was all she had left to fight a war. She looked up at the sliver of sky above the crevice. It was brown and angry. She wasn't a doll. She wasn't a girl. She was a mechanism of ballistics, and she was running out of fuel. "Overwatch is displaced," she radioed, her voice regaining its icy calm. "Resetting. Give me targets." She crawled back up toward the lip of the fissure. The storm wasn't done with her, and neither were the men who wanted her dead. The DSHK heavy machine guns stopped firing. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise. For the last 10 minutes, the mountain had been vibrating with the impact of 12.7mm rounds. Now, there was only the wind. Elara lay pressed into the fissure, her chest heaving against the cold stone. She knew what the silence meant. It wasn't a retreat. It was a handover. The heavy gunners had done their job. They had suppressed her, pinned her, and marked her general grid square. Now they were clearing the air for someone else. Someone precise. "Actual hold position," Elara whispered, her hand cupping the microphone to shield it from the wind. "Heavy fire has ceased. They are changing tactics." "We are moving, Vance," Thorne hissed. "We made the ravine. We have hard cover. What's your status?" "I am waiting." She didn't move her body. She moved only her eyes, scanning the lip of the fissure above her. The dust swirled in brown eddies. Visibility was fluctuating between 50 meters and 0. She knew he was out there. In every theater of war, there is always a counterpart. For every SEAL team, there is a Spetsnaz unit. For every Elara Vance, there was a man who had spent his life hunting ibex in these mountains, breathing this thin air, waiting for a foreign invader to climb his ridges. She slowly, incrementally raised her head, just enough to clear the rock line with her eyes. Snap. It wasn't a boom. It was the sharp, violent crack of a supersonic whip. A chunk of granite the size of a fist exploded 3 inches from her face. Elara threw herself backward, rolling deep into the crevice as sharp stone fragments peppered her cheek and forehead. The sound of the gunshot, the actual report, arrived a split second later. Crack. Distinct. Sharper than an AK. Heavier than a standard patrol rifle. "Sniper!" Elara gasped, wiping blood from her eyelid. "Actual. I am engaged by a counter-sniper. 7 is IX-2 rimmed. Likely Dragunov. Can you spot him?" "Negative. He's shooting through the dust. He saw my flash." She was trapped. The enemy sniper had her dialed in. He was watching the only exit from her fissure. If she popped up to shoot, he would kill her. If she stayed, the flanking infantry would eventually work their way up the scree and drop a grenade on her head. She looked at her gear, the Pelican case wedged in the rocks, the spotting scope on its tripod, the ballistic computer, the sleeping mat. "Lighten the load," she whispered. She couldn't take it. She had to move fast, and she had to move low. She grabbed the TAC-50. It was heavy, cumbersome, a burden. She grabbed the Kestrel meter and shoved it into her pocket. She grabbed the remaining magazine, everything else, the thousands of dollars of optical equipment, the armor plates in her vest. She left. She unclipped her plate carrier, shedding 20 pounds of ceramic protection. It was a calculated risk. She was trading armor for agility. If she got hit, she died. But if she was slow, she died anyway. "Displacing," she murmured. She didn't go up. She went down. There was a narrow, terrifying goat path that cut diagonally across the sheer face of the cliff, below her current position. It was barely a foot wide, covered in loose shale, with a 2,000-foot drop to the left. Elara slid over the edge of the fissure, her boots scrabbling for purchase. The wind caught her immediately, trying to peel her off the wall. She hugged the rock, pressing her cheek against the cold stone. She moved, hand over hand, boot over boot. Snap! Another round struck the rock 5 feet above her. He was guessing now. He knew she had to move. She froze. The bullet impact sent a shower of dust down her neck. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the rising bile of panic. This wasn't math. This wasn't science. This was being a small, soft animal on a big, hard rock. "Don't die," she whispered. "Not here. Not like this." She forced her eyes open. She looked at her hands. They were raw, bleeding from the sharp stone. She looked at the rifle strapped to her back. It felt like it weighed a ton. She kept moving. 10 meters, 20 meters. She found a depression, a small bowl in the cliff face, shielded by a jutting overhang. It was a terrible sniper position. It offered a limited field of view, only covering the northern approach. But it was unexpected. No one would choose this spot, which made it perfect. Elara rolled into the depression, gasping for air. The altitude was hammering her lungs. She pulled the rifle around, checking the scope. The lens was coated in dust. She wiped it with her thumb, smearing a mixture of grit and her own blood across the glass. "Actual," she croaked. "I am set. Secondary position." "Vance, are you hit?" Thorne's voice was different now, concerned. "We heard the shots." "I'm fine," she lied. The blood was dripping off her chin onto the stock of the rifle. "I stripped my gear. I'm mobile. We are holding in the ravine. The trucks are holding position. They're waiting for the sniper to finish you." "He won't," she said. She peered into the brown void. Somewhere out there, across the valley or on the parallel ridge, he was looking for her. He was scanning the likely spots, the high ground, the commanding views. He wouldn't look in the dark, cramped bowl halfway down the cliff. She had stripped away the technology. She had stripped away the armor. She had stripped away the hierarchy. Now it was just 2 shooters in a storm. "Come on," she whispered, settling the crosshairs on the white-hot blur of the enemy truck line. "Show yourself." She waited. The wind howled, mocking her. She ignored it. She was listening for the rhythm again. But this time, she wasn't listening for the wind to shoot. She was listening for the silence that would tell her he was about to pull the trigger. The mountain was a graveyard of jagged slate and screaming wind, and somewhere in the monochrome brown hell, a man was hunting her. Elara lay in the depression of the cliff face, curled into a ball around the rifle. She was small, a fact that had been used to belittle her for her entire career. But now, it was the only reason she was still breathing. A larger shooter would have been exposed. A larger shooter would have snagged a boot or an elbow on the narrow ledge. Elara fit into the mountain's scars like she was carved from them. She forced her breathing to slow. The air at 10,000 feet was thin, offering little oxygen to fuel her racing heart. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of her own pulse was deafening in her ears, competing with the roar of the sandstorm. She didn't look at the kestrel meter. She had jammed it into a pocket, but retrieving it would require movement she couldn't afford. Besides, the data was useless. The wind here, tucked into this bowl, was different from the wind on the ridge. It swirled, eddied, and lied. She closed her eyes for a second, focusing on the sensation of the air against her exposed skin. The blood on her cheek had dried into a crust, stinging and tight. She felt the cold draft hitting the left side of her nose. Wind is west to east. Fast, but cutting downward. She opened her eyes and pressed them to the thermal scope. The world was a grainy wash of gray. The storm was cooling the surface of the rocks, reducing the contrast. Finding a human body in this was like finding a needle in a haystack, while the haystack was on fire. Snap. A bullet struck the cliff face 30 meters above her, near her old position. He was searching. He was firing recon by fire, hoping to provoke a reaction or catch a fleeing target. Elara didn't flinch. She traced the trajectory in her mind. The crack of the bullet passing, the delay of the report. The sound had come from the northeast, a parallel spur of rock, slightly lower than her original position, but higher than her current one. She panned the rifle slowly. The barrel moved millimeters at a time. There. It wasn't a clear shape. It was a smudge of heat, fainter than the truck engines, but steady. A biological warmth. It was tucked behind a slab of rock, invisible to the naked eye, but the thermal sensor picked up the heat radiating from the rifle barrel or the shooter's face. He was 200 meters away. Close. Dangerously close for a sniper duel. At that range, flight time was under 2 seconds. Elara's hand tightened on the grip. She was shivering, not from fear, but from the hypothermia creeping into her extremities now that her core temperature was dropping. She had to shoot. But the wind was gusting violently, tearing across the gap between the two ridges. A 200-meter shot in a sandstorm was a gamble. If she missed, the muzzle flash would give her away instantly. He would adjust, and his semi-automatic Dragunov could put 5 rounds in the air before she could cycle her bolt once. She waited. "Patience is the weapon," her instructor had said. "The rifle is just the delivery system." She watched the heat smudge. It shifted. He was restless. He couldn't find her, and it was making him sloppy. He raised up slightly, likely trying to get a better angle on her previous hideout. The wind howled, a crescendo of noise that vibrated her chest. Not yet. She felt the pressure change in her ears. The gust was peaking. It slammed against the cliff, throwing sand into her face. Then the breath. The lull. The roar dropped to a low moan. The pressure on her left cheek eased. Now. Elara didn't think about the math. She didn't calculate the spin drift. She looked at the smudge, dragged the reticle 2 mils to the right to account for the residual drift, and pressed the trigger. Boom. The recoil was a brutal shove, driving her shoulder into the rock wall behind her. The suppressor barked, a tongue of flame licking out into the dust. She didn't close her eyes. She fought the recoil, keeping the scope on target. The heat smudge jerked. It wasn't a clean drop. The figure flailed, rising up for a split second, a frantic, involuntary spasm of the central nervous system, before toppling backward over the edge of his ridge. She watched the heat signature plummet, tumbling down the scree slope until it disappeared into the darker, colder air of the ravine floor. "Splash," she whispered. The word felt like gravel in her throat. Silence returned to the upper atmosphere of the battle. The counter-sniper was gone. The immediate predator was dead. Elara slumped against the rock, the adrenaline dumping out of her system, leaving her hollow and shaking. She wanted to close her eyes. She wanted to sleep. The cold was seductive now. "Overwatch! Report!" Thorne's voice crackled in her ear, sharp and demanding. "We heard a shot. Who fired?" Elara drew a shuddering breath. She had to force her hand to move, to reach up and key the mic. "Threat neutralized," she rasped. "Counter-sniper is down. Northeast ridge is clear." "Copy that." Thorne sounded relieved, almost giddy. "Good work, Nano. We are moving. We're pushing for the extraction point. We need you to cover the rear. The trucks are still out there." The trucks. She had forgotten about the trucks. The duel had consumed her entire world, shrinking the war down to 2 people. Now, it expanded again. "Copy," she said. I have 11 rounds. Make them count." She pushed herself up. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her right arm was numb. She grabbed the TAC-50, checking the action. The bolt was gritty with sand. She cycled it, listening to the crunch of silica against steel. It was a dirty, ugly sound, but the round seated. She wasn't done. The storm was still raging, and her team was still trapped in the kill box. "Moving back to primary vantage," she said to no one. She couldn't stay in the bowl. It offered no angle on the valley floor. She had to climb back up, back into the wind, back into the exposure. She clawed her way up the goat path, dragging the rifle. Every inch was a battle against gravity and exhaustion. She wasn't an operator anymore. She was a creature of pure will, fueled by the refusal to let 7 men die because she was too small to carry the weight. She reached the top, rolling over the lip of the ridge. The wind hit her instantly, colder and harder than before. She ignored it. She set the bipod. She found the thermal signatures of the enemy trucks. They were waiting, and so was she. The climb back to the ridge had taken everything she had left. Elara collapsed behind the bipod, her chest heaving with dry, ragged gasps. Her vision was tunneling, the edges of the world turning a fuzzy gray. Dehydration had set in hours ago, and now, combined with the altitude and the adrenaline crash, it was shutting down her fine motor skills. Her hands felt like they belonged to someone else, clumsy, swollen, and unresponsive. "Overwatch is set," she croaked into the radio. Her throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. "Copy, Overwatch," Thorne replied. "We are moving to the extract. 800 meters to the LZ, we are exposed." Elara wiped the scope lens with a trembling finger. The storm was shifting again. The wind remained violent, but the density of the sand was thinning in patches, creating momentary corridors of visibility. Through the thermal sight, she saw the SEALs. They were moving in a staggered column, dragging their wounded. They looked small, fragile, and pitifully slow. Then she saw the 3rd truck. It had been waiting. The other 2 vehicles, the one she burned and the one she suppressed, were stationary. But the 3rd one, a heavy-duty cargo truck reinforced with welded steel plates, began to move. It didn't flank. It didn't seek cover. It accelerated directly toward the SEAL column. "Contact!" Elara screamed, the urgency cutting through her exhaustion. "Vehicle moving! Fast mover! Southbound on the hardball! It's coming right for you!" "We see it!" Viper yelled. "Engaging!" Down in the valley, the SEALs dropped to one knee and opened fire. Small arms tracers zipped toward the truck, sparking harmlessly off the improvised armor plating. The truck didn't slow down. It roared over the uneven ground, bouncing violently, closing the distance at terrifying speed. "It's a VBIED!" Thorne shouted. "Suicide runner! Spread out! Spread out!" A vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. A rolling bomb. If it got within 50 meters, the blast wave alone would liquefy their internal organs. "Vance, stop it!" Thorne pleaded. "Stop that truck!" Elara forced her eye to the scope. The truck was a white-hot blur. It was moving at roughly 40 miles per hour, bouncing over the wadi floor. Distance, 2,400 meters. Target speed, 60 feet per second. Time of flight, 3.8 seconds. The math crashed into her brain, hurting physically. She had to lead the target. She had to aim where the truck would be in 4 seconds. But the truck was moving across her field of view, and the wind was pushing against the bullet from the opposite direction. "Leading," she whispered. She swung the rifle barrel. It felt impossibly heavy. She tracked the truck, moving past the grill, past the hood, past the empty air in front of it. 10 feet, 20 feet, 50 feet. She had to aim nearly 100 feet in front of the moving vehicle to account for the flight time and the wind. She was aiming at a patch of empty sand. "Too fast," she hissed. "It's moving too fast." If she missed, she wouldn't get a second shot. The truck would close the gap before she could cycle the bolt. "They're not stopping," Miller screamed. "It's too close. 500 meters." Elara stopped tracking. She stopped trying to calculate the perfect intercept. She looked at the terrain. Ahead of the truck, about 200 meters, there was a shallow dip in the wadi, a dry wash where the ground rose sharply on the other side. The truck would have to hit that dip. It would compress the suspension. It would slow down just for a fraction of a second. "Trap set," she murmured. She moved her crosshairs to the lip of the rise. She held the aim steady, ignoring the moving target. She waited for the truck to drive into her crosshairs. "Wait for it." The truck roared closer. The heat signature grew larger, filling the scope. "Vance! Now! Shoot now!" "Wait!" The truck hit the dip. The front end dipped down, slamming into the earth, then bounced up, exposing the undercarriage, the front axle and the oil pan. "Now!" She squeezed the trigger. Boom! The Macmillan kicked her shoulder, a dull thud against the bruised meat. 1, 2, 3. The truck crested the rise. 4. The round impacted. It didn't hit the driver. It hit the front left wheel hub, shattering the axle and detonating inside the suspension assembly. The kinetic energy of the .50 caliber Raufoss round, combined with the truck's forward momentum, was catastrophic. The wheel sheared off. The front corner of the truck dug into the ground. The vehicle cartwheeled. The massive steel box flipped end over end, spraying sand and metal parts into the air. It rolled once, twice, 3 times, losing momentum with every brutal impact. It slid to a halt on its side. A smoking ruin, 200 meters from the SEAL team. Elara cycled the bolt immediately, her eyes never leaving the scope. She expected the explosion. She waited for the whiteout, but it didn't detonate. The wiring had likely severed in the crash, or the trigger mechanism had failed. "Vehicle disabled," Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. She slumped over the rifle, her forehead resting on the cold scope cap. "Target is stopped." "Stopped?" Thorne's voice was incredulous. "You flipped it. You flipped the whole damn truck." "It was the axle," Elara mumbled. She was slurring her words now. The edges of her vision were black. "Don't go near it. Just go home." "We are moving. LZ is in sight," Thorne said. "Vance, can you move? Can you make it to the extraction?" Elara lifted her head. The world spun. She looked at the empty magazine well. She looked at the last round sitting on the rock next to her. She picked it up. It felt heavy, like a gold bar. She loaded it into the chamber and closed the bolt. "I have 1 round left," she said. "I'm not leaving until your wheel's up." "We're not leaving you, Nano," Thorne said firmly. "Get your gear. Start walking down. We will hold the bird." "Negative," she said. "I'm slower than you. If I come down, I slow you down. The storm is lifting. If the storm lifts, the others will see you." She looked out at the horizon. The wall of brown was thinning. The sun was trying to punch through, a hazy white disk in the sky. "Get to the bird, Thorne," she ordered. "I'll cover the rear. Just come get me when it's safe." She knew it might not be safe for a long time. She knew she was stranded on a ridgeline in hostile territory with 1 bullet and a body that was shutting down. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She felt like the mountain itself. "Go," she said. And she put her eye back to the scope. The end of the storm was as sudden as its arrival. The wind, which had been a constant physical assault for 3 hours, didn't just fade, it collapsed. The wall of brown particulate matter began to settle, gravity finally reclaiming the sand. The sun, previously a dim white coin, sharpened into a blinding gold disk. Elara lay draped over the Macmillan TAC 50. Her body was a wreck. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her right eye was swollen shut from the grit, and her shoulder felt like shattered glass. She watched the world come back into focus. The valley floor was revealed. It was a scene of absolute devastation. The wreckage of the VBIED was a twisted scar of black metal on the beige sand, still smoking gently. The second truck she had hit earlier was a burnt-out husk. Bodies lay scattered in the scrub brush, tiny, motionless, distinct shapes. And far below, near the extraction point, 7 green figures were waving infrared strobes. "Kingpin 26 is inbound," the pilot's voice, crackled, clear and crisp now that the static interference was gone. "We have visual on the LZ. Conditions are green, coming in hot." Elara tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled so violently they collapsed. She stayed prone. She was safe. They were safe. The math had held. The thumping of rotors echoed off the canyon walls. 2 MH-60 MIM Blackhawks swept low over the ridge, their downdraft kicking up a fresh, smaller cloud of dust. They banked hard, flaring their noses to bleed speed, before settling into the valley floor. "Echo is moving to the bird," Thorne reported. "We have the package. Counting heads. All up." Elara watched through the scope as the SEALs boarded the lead helo. They moved with the sluggishness of men who had seen death too close. They threw the prisoner in, then scrambled aboard. But the helo didn't lift. "Kingpin, hold on the deck," Thorne's voice cut through. "We are missing one. Overwatch is still high." "We are burning fuel, actual," the pilot warned. "I can't sit here. The locals are waking up." "I am not leaving her," Thorne said. The command was absolute. "Fly up there and get her." "Copy. Guide us in." The lead Blackhawk lifted, nose down, and began the climb. To Elara, the machine looked like a giant, angry insect rising to meet her. As it gained altitude, the perspective shifted. Inside the helicopter, Thorne and the rest of Echo Team were looking out the open bay doors. As they rose, the valley floor dropped away. They passed the burnt trucks. They passed the bodies. And they kept climbing. They climbed past the 1,000-meter mark, past the 2,000-meter mark, past the sheer cliff face where the counter-sniper had fallen. For the first time, the SEALs saw the distance. They saw the impossible geometry of the shots. They looked down at the smoking wreckage of the VBIED, a tiny speck miles away, and then looked up at the ridgeline where Elara was perched. "My God," Miller shouted over the intercom, his voice audible to Elara. "She hit that truck from here?" "She hit everything from here," Thorne muttered, staring out at the jagged rock face. The Blackhawk hovered level with Elara's ledge. The pilot held the bird steady against the updrafts, the rotor tips feet from the granite wall. "Overwatch, we can't land!" the crew chief yelled, leaning out on his harness. "You have to jump. Come to the door." Elara forced her body to move. She grabbed the barrel of the TAC 50. It was her anchor. She dragged herself to her knees, then to her feet. She swayed, dizzy, the world tilting. She looked at the open door of the helicopter. 7 pairs of eyes were locked on her. There was no mockery, No laughter. There was only a terrified, reverent silence. She took a step. The wind from the rotors threatened to blow her off the ledge. She leaned into it, clutching the rifle case she had recovered, though she hadn't had the strength to pack the weapon properly. She held the rifle naked in her hand. "Come on, Nano!" Miller screamed, reaching his hand out. She stepped off the ledge. For a second she was falling. Then strong hands grabbed her flight suit. Miller and Thorne hauled her inside, dragging her across the diamond plate floor. The crew chief yelled, "Clear! Go! Go!" The Black Hawk banked violently, diving back toward the valley floor to gain airspeed. Elara collapsed against the bulkhead. She hugged the rifle to her chest. Her head fell back against the metal wall. She closed her eyes. She felt a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, instinctively tightening her grip on the weapon. "Easy," Thorne's voice said. It was soft. "Easy, Chief. You're safe." She opened her one good eye. Thorne was kneeling in front of her. He looked exhausted, his face caked in dust and dried blood. He looked at the rifle in her arms, the weapon he had mocked as too big for a doll. Then he looked at her. He reached out and unclipped a canteen from his belt. He didn't hand it to her. He unscrewed the cap and held it to her lips, like one would for a child or a wounded comrade. "Drink," he said. Elara took a sip. The water was warm and tasted of plastic, but it was the best thing she had ever tasted. She swallowed and pulled away. She looked around the cabin. Every SEAL was staring at her. The dynamic had broken. The hierarchy of size and strength had been shattered by the undeniable reality of ballistics. "Did we get him?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the turbines. Thorne nodded, jerking a thumb at the hooded prisoner cowering in the back. "Yeah, we got him." "Good," she said. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes again. The vibration of the helicopter lulled her. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a hollow ache. 2 miles, she heard Miller whisper to Viper. She shot the engine block at 2 miles in a sandstorm. "Shut up," Thorne snapped at them. "Let her sleep." Elara didn't sleep. She just listened to the sound of the rotors taking her away from the hell she had ruled for 6 hours. She was 4'9". She weighed 95 pounds, and she was the heaviest thing on the bird. The ramp of the Chinook dropped onto the tarmac at FICTIONAL Manville, and the world rushed back in, loud, bright, and bureaucratic. Medical personnel were waiting. They swarmed the aircraft like white ants, looking for trauma. They pulled the hooded prisoner from the back, securing him to a stretcher. They checked the SEALs, who waved them off with the irritable exhaustion of men who just wanted a shower and a beer. Then they saw Elara. She was sitting on the bench seat, her legs dangling, not quite touching the floor. Her face was a mask of dried blood, grease paint, and pulverized limestone. Her right eye was swollen shut. Her flight suit was torn at the shoulder, revealing the angry purple bruising that had spread down to her bicep. "Ma'am, let us get a litter," a medic said, reaching for her. "Don't touch me," Elara said. Her voice was a rasp, but the command was absolute. "I can walk." She slid off the bench. Her knees buckled slightly, but she locked them out. She reached for the naked rifle lying next to her. "I got it," Miller said, stepping forward. "No," Elara said. "It's my weapon." She grabbed the barrel of the Macmillan TC-50. It dragged on the floor plating. She hauled it down the ramp, stepping into the floodlights of the base. The base personnel stopped to watch. They saw 7 giants walking behind a woman who looked like a child broken by a storm. They went straight to the JOC, Joint Operations Center, for the immediate debrief. The room was cold, air-conditioned to a sterile chill that made Elara shiver uncontrollably. An intelligence officer, a clean-shaven major who smelled of soap and coffee, sat behind a table. He looked at the team, then at Elara, then at the map. "We have the drone footage from before the storm," the major said, tapping a stylus on a tablet. "And we have the post-storm BDA, battle damage assessment. We're trying to reconcile the timeline." He looked at Thorne. "Commander, you're claiming 3 technicals destroyed and 11 enemy combatants KIA, but air support was waved off. Who engaged?" Thorne was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed. He looked at Elara, who was sitting in the corner, nursing a cup of lukewarm water. "Overwatch engaged," Thorne said. The major squinted. "All of them?" "The report says the engagement range was between 2,000 and 3,000 meters, in zero visibility." He chuckled nervously. "That's a statistical impossibility, Commander. We need to file an accurate report. Was it a mortar team? Did you call in artillery before the comms went down?" Thorne pushed himself off the wall. He walked to the table and slammed his fist down on the map. It wasn't a violent gesture, but it was heavy. "Write it down exactly as I said it," Thorne growled. "CWO3 Vance engaged 3 vehicles. She destroyed a moving VBIED at 2,400 meters with a Raufoss round while we were in the kill zone. She saved the entire element." The major looked at Elara. She didn't look up. She was staring at the water in her cup, watching the ripples. "Chief Vance," the major asked, skepticism dripping from his voice, "can you verify the ballistics?" Elara reached into her flight suit pocket. She pulled out her wet, crumpled logbook. She tossed it onto the table. It landed with a soft thap. "It's all in there," she whispered. "Windage. Drop. Time of flight. Read it." The major opened the book. He saw the scribbled numbers, the sketches, the frantic math of survival. He looked at the sketches of the VBIED lead. He looked at the wind calculations. 60 knots. He closed the book slowly. The skepticism vanished, replaced by a confused unease. "Okay," the major said quietly. I'll file it." The debrief ended. There were no handshakes, no backslapping. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only the awkward reality of social dynamics. They walked out to the transport bay, where the vehicles were waiting to take them to their respective billets. The SEALs were going to the Tier 1 compound. Elara was going to transient housing. She found her Pelican case where the crew chief had dumped it. It looked like a coffin, long, black, and scarred. She knelt down and began to disassemble the rifle. Her hands were stiff. It took her twice as long as usual to break the weapon down and fit the pieces into the foam cutouts. She snapped the latches shut. Click, click, click. She stood up and grabbed the side handle. She pulled. The case didn't move. Her strength was gone. The rhabdomyolysis, muscle breakdown from extreme exertion, was setting in. Her arms were jelly. She gritted her teeth, angry tears pricking her eyes. She refused to ask for help. She refused to be weak now, after everything. She braced her legs and pulled again. The case lifted an inch, then slammed back down. A shadow fell over her. It was Thorne. He was freshly showered, wearing clean PT gear, but he still looked like he had been through a grinder. He didn't say a word. He didn't make a joke about her size. He didn't offer a patronizing smile. He simply reached down, grabbed the handle of the case with one hand, and lifted it. He swung the 80-pound case up onto his shoulder as if it were empty. "Where is your truck?" he asked. "Transient lot," Elara said, staring at him. "I'm parked there." He lied. His truck was in the opposite direction. They walked in silence across the gravel lot. The sound of their boots crunched in unison. Thorn carried the weapon that had saved his life. Elara walked beside him, her hands empty, but her head high. When they reached the Humvee assigned to take her, Thorn swung the case into the back bed. He dusted off his hands. He stood there for a moment, looking down at her. The height difference was still comical. He was 6'4". She was 4'9". But the dynamic had shifted. He wasn't looking down at a subordinate. He was looking down at a dangerous anomaly. "Thorn," Elara said, breaking the silence. "The report. Thanks for verifying." Thorn looked at the ground, scuffing his boot in the dirt. He was a man of violence, not words. Apologies were foreign to him. "You were right about the wind," Thorn said abruptly. "In the briefing. You were right." It was the only admission he could make. "I usually am," Elara replied, a faint, tired smile touching her cracked lips. Thorn snorted, a genuine laugh. "Yeah, I guess you are." He hesitated, then extended a hand. It was the size of a shovel. Elara took it. Her small, battered hand disappeared inside his grip. He didn't squeeze hard. He shook it once, firmly, with respect. "See you around, Nano," he said. He didn't use the nickname to mock her. He used it the way men in his profession used call signs for things they feared, like Reaper or Spectre. He used it to acknowledge that she was something small that caused massive destruction. "Stay low, Actual," she said. Thorn turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the base. Elara climbed into the passenger seat of the Humvee. The driver, a young Army private, looked at her wide-eyed. He looked at the bruising on her face, the blood in her hair. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked nervously. "You look like you went through a blender." Elara leaned her head against the cool glass of the window. She watched the lights of the airfield blur as the truck started to move. She thought about the wind. She thought about the math. She thought about the silence between the trigger brake and the impact. "I'm fine," she whispered, closing her eyes as the exhaustion finally took her. "I'm just a little short." The truck drove off into the night, carrying the smallest giant in the Hindu Kush,